Welcome to Lesson 2 of the Better Online Events mini course by Thrive Themes. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to create better online classes and online workshops. So this is the scenario where you want to get people together and you want to teach them something, and there might also be some interaction, some Q&A, some group work involved in an online class. Let's look at the tools and the setup you need in order to make that work as smoothly as possible. Now, before we get into further details, note that this is lesson 2 and it'll help you tremendously if you watch lesson 1 first. So let's get started with part 1. I'll walk you through my recommended setup here for two purposes: for making a pre-recorded lesson that you will upload and that people can watch anytime, and also for doing a live online class. And for the most part, the setup and the tech we use for those two different things are basically the same. So let's start by going through the setup I have here. So what I've got here is I have my laptop, I have it propped up on a laptop stand, and I have an external webcam on it because the internal webcam is pretty bad. So in order to get a better image quality, I put an external webcam that I've connected via USB. And then, so that I don't have to awkwardly work on the laptop here in this raised position, I have external mouse and keyboard that I'm going to use for my inputs. Another very important thing, as we discussed in lesson 1, is that we have external audio. And here, let me just quickly show. So this is a Zoom H2 recorder. There are many audio recording devices like this, and I can actually use this as a microphone. So if I plug this in, it gives me a choice of whether I basically want to read the files off of the card inside this, or I can use it as an audio device. And if I choose that and connect, my computer will recognize this as an audio device, basically just as a USB microphone. So that's the way I set this up. And I have tested this setup. Again, we talked in lesson 1 about the importance of testing through your setup before you get started. And so I know that this setup here, the mic is on the desk, it's close enough to me, it's giving me much better sound than if I had it using the internal microphone. And with this setup, I can basically work, and people who are watching the video or the online class are getting, clean, clear audio and video as they're watching. Now, one more thing, if this was a live class, I would also use headphones. So that will make it much easier for me to interact with students. If there's any kind of audio interaction there, then again, it's not coming out of my speakers and potentially creating feedback by being recorded in the microphone. So I'd be wearing my headphones for the duration of the event for that as well. So that is our technical setup. Now let's move on to software. And there, what you'll most likely be using to assist your presentation for an online class is you might be using some kind of a slides, Google Slides, PowerPoint, Keynote, anything like that. So a presentation software. And you might also want to have something like a virtual whiteboard, like a web whiteboard, which you can use to make more spontaneous scribbles and diagrams and so on as you're explaining things. What I'm going to be using for demonstration purposes is I have made a simple demonstration slide deck here, because the most important thing that you need to prepare and you need to practice is basically switching between moderating an online class and your demonstration tool. Or even when you're doing a screen recording, if you want to be able to switch between your notes and your slides, or your slides and your whiteboard, you want to be able to do that smoothly so you're not losing a ton of time every time you need to switch from one thing to the next. Now, as we discussed in lesson number 1, it's important to consider whether you want to do the entire class online or whether you want to pre-record some material so that your students can watch it before or even reference it after easily. So we'll start with that. If you want to pre-record something and make it available online, here's how to do it. For screen recording, I recommend either using a built-in screen recording tool, such as the built-in feature in QuickTime for Apple computers, or using a tool called Screen, by Wondershare, which is a very low-cost screen recording and basic editing tool, which I recommend for this purpose. So I'll go ahead and start this up right here. Click on Get Started, and this gives me various capture options. So I can tell this to record full screen. For the frame rate, I'll choose 30. Audio, I wanted to capture my external mic, and I can also have it capture my webcam, and I want it to capture the external webcam. And I can also change the resolution here, but I will keep this at a small resolution, and I want to have the same frame rate on my webcam as I have on the screen. With that ready, I can click on Capture, and I get a little control panel here where I can actually still make changes if I want to. And when I'm ready to go, I basically just hit record right here. Gives me a little countdown, and then I'm ready to record. Now, what I haven't done yet here is I haven't started my presentation yet. So if this is my presentation tool in Google Slides, I click on present and I switch this to full screen. And now I will have this ready. So this is capturing my webcam at the same time as my screen. And what I can do is I can talk through my slides and I can present to the webcam right here. And I can also switch, and right here, so if I ever want to switch to my notes or a different tool, the way I recommend doing this is by using Alt-Tab on a Windows computer or whatever the equivalent of that is on a Mac, where I can, without having to click through windows and things, I can basically bring up all my windows and I can quickly switch and bring in my notes here, for example. And then with a single Alt-Tab, I can immediately go back to my presentation like this. So this is the easiest way to organize it. And if you're always switching back and forth between the same applications, between the same two, then it's always just Alt-Tab to make that switch. And that's basically the most efficient way to do it. All right, so when that's done, I stop the recording and then it loads up the editor where I can do some basic editing to finish up my file. That's what we're seeing right here. And we have the recording that we just made is this file here. If I drag this down, you can see that it's basically 3 tracks. We have the bottom track is the screen that we recorded. The middle track is the webcam that we recorded. And the top track is the audio that we recorded. What you can do is you can move this playhead around and you can do some basic edits. So for example, it took me a while before I actually launched into the presentation. Right at the beginning of the video right here, you still see my windows in the background and so on. And maybe I would want to start my presentation here when I actually full screen the presentation. So I can place the playhead here. I can choose this track here with the screen and I can cut this. And in fact, I can cut all 3 tracks right here. Select these here. This is basically the bit that we don't need before I really started, and I delete these tracks. Another thing we can do in this editor, so here, that's how you basically do the basic edits, right? You can cut parts out. And the other thing we can do is the webcam feed here is a separate layer, so I can move this around. And so what we can do on the one hand is we can just place this somewhere. Maybe I want to resize it a bit. Maybe I just want to be here in the bottom corner during the entire presentation. But there might also be parts of the presentation where I'm covering something important on the screen and we can cut that bit out. So again, I can go here, I can cut, I can go forward, I can cut again, and then delete this bit, which means that when we get to this part of the video, the webcam part will disappear and the entire screen will be visible. So that gives us an easy way. And of course I can also, let's say once we get here, maybe I want to move it in a different position. So then we have the first part of the video where I'm down here, then a part where I'm not visible, and then a part where I'm in a different part of the screen. So with this basic editor, there's not that much we can do here in terms of editing, but it's enough to give us control of exactly what people will see when they watch this video that we recorded. So once that's done, we go to export and we click on create video. So that's how we turn this recording into a final rendered video. So we give it a name, video name. We choose where we want to save it. And you can choose your basic settings, but basically you can leave the defaults. The only thing I would change here is because we recorded this in 30 frames a second, we might as well export it in 30 frames a second. And then you click export, that gives you a video file. And this video file you can then upload. And here are your basic options. You can upload it to YouTube, either as a public video that anyone can watch and find, or you can make it an unlisted video on YouTube, which means that still anyone can watch it, but only people who know the URL of the video will find it. So people won't find it in search or in recommendations in YouTube. So that's an easy way to kind of make a semi-private video. Another option is to upload to Vimeo, where also you can have it either public or unlisted. And also if you want to get paid for this content, Vimeo is one of the easiest ways to do that, because on Vimeo, there's a feature called Vimeo On Demand. If you have a pro account, you can actually charge people to watch a video or to watch a series of videos. So that's one of the quickest ways to create some content and get people to pay you to watch that content without having to set up, a huge membership, shopping cart and so on solution. Next, let's take a look at how to take this same setup and do a live online class using a meeting tool. Now, for the purposes of running an online class, the tools that are made that are most suitable for this purpose are tools like Skype with the new Skype Meetings feature, Google Hangouts, Zoom, which has gotten a lot of use recently, but there are also other tools such as WebEx, Samba Live, and Live Webinar that are worth looking at. Now, maybe you've seen recently that Zoom has become a very popular tool for doing things like online meetings and classes, but it's also received a lot of scrutiny and criticism because while it's a popular tool, it is really terrible at things like privacy and security. There have been all kinds of security flaws exposed, and Zoom has a long history of gathering up loads and loads of data without asking its users and doing who knows what nefarious things with this data behind users' backs. So if you're wary of that and security and privacy are important to you, then I do recommend looking for an alternative to Zoom, and I'll also be showing alternatives in these tutorials. Now, the main difference, all our setup here is going to be exactly the same, but the main difference is the tool that we use to broadcast this live. And there's, of course, tons of tools to choose from. Now, to demonstrate some of the things to know, I will start by using Skype, which is something you can use for free and something that's also fairly popularly used. So let's switch to Skype. What we want to do here is before we start anything, we want to go to our settings and we want to go to audio and video. And here we can test out if all this stuff is working. So here I can switch between the webcams, and you can see here that the built-in webcam in the laptop is not doing a great job. Whereas if I switch to the external one, it has a much more pleasing angle, a better image and everything. And the same with the microphone, right? I have to make sure that it's actually choosing the external microphone here and not the built-in microphone, and that the audio is coming out of the correct speakers. And once this is set up, we can also do a test call on Skype. So if we just search for test, you can see that there's a sound test service. And there you can then basically record yourself briefly and listen back to what that actually sounds like. Next up, what we can do is we can click on Meet Now. So if you install the latest version of Skype, you'll have this Meet Now button. So you don't have to select contacts to call. You can just click on Meet Now and it creates a new meeting room. And here again, it gives you kind of a preview, and you can test your inputs and change your inputs. One thing I would say, I've noticed that in many cases, the blur my background feature is enabled by default, and it kind of tries to draw a mask around you and blur out the background. If you're presenting, don't do that. It looks really weird and distracting. And I recommend that, instead of blurring out, you just clean up the room behind you if it's a mess or something, and don't use the blur feature here. All right, and then we have a meeting link where we can just click here to copy this link, and we can then start the call. And the way I like to get people into the call is that we just go to whatever your main communication tool is. So if you have Skype or a WhatsApp group or whatever it is, you just paste that link there to get people to join. And you can also join them if they have a Skype account or email it or whatever. You can also get this at any time. Down here, we have share call link, and you can copy the link or send it to Skype contacts or email it right here. Now, one thing to note is that in Skype, a couple of these features will only show up once you have at least one participant. So the recording and your screen sharing and reactions will only show up once you have at least one person joining. So a couple of notes on this. First of all, by default, as with many meeting tools, anyone who joins a Skype meeting will have their microphone activated. And for an online class, if there's a section where you're just teaching, this can be quite irritating if you have loads of people all with live mics and all kinds of background sound coming through. So it's a good idea to basically remind people, okay, for the presentation part of what we're doing here, please mute your microphones so that nobody is distracted by other people's input. And the other thing is that there's a recording feature, so you can simply click on Start Recording to record your online class, and that gives you then a video file that you can download from within Skype. You can then use that afterwards and again upload it to YouTube or Vimeo or any place like that. Now, one of the most important things to make this go smoothly is that in general, you'll be sharing your webcam, and you also want to be able to share your screen. And here there are some important options. So what I don't recommend is that you choose share the entire screen. Instead, share an application window. So I'm going to choose the application window that has my full screen presentation going. And I could also choose the application window that has the my whiteboard or whatever going. And here's why. And also I'll turn off share computer sound. In most cases, you probably don't want that, but that's an option here. So if I start sharing this, here's the advantage. I can now switch into my presentation and I can go through my presentation. And by the way, I want to hide this here because otherwise the place where that little picture-in-picture video appears will be invisible. It will basically be like a gray box on people's, on how the people see your screen, right? So you want to have a free screen here, and I can go through my slides here and everyone on the meeting will see this. But because I'm only sharing this application window, I can switch back into Skype and I can do, I can go into the chat and share a link, or I can do something here without people seeing my Skype view. And that's generally a better experience, right? And it also means that I can be going through my presentation here and maybe I want to call up some notes, and people will not see this window with notes. They will only see the actual slides in the background. So that is a great way for a single monitor setup. This is the recommended way to do it, because otherwise, if you share your entire screen, people will always see, your taskbar and your notes. And when you switch back to Skype, they see your face twice because the Skype window shows your face and their screen shows your face and so on. So it basically just is a much messier presentation. But if you selectively choose what window to share, what application windows share, then you have a clean, good-looking presentation. The one downside of this is that if you're switching between multiple tools, so if you have a presentation and a whiteboard, you have to remember to switch which application you're sharing. So for that, we need to go back into Skype and we have to go into screen sharing options. And here we can switch screen or window or stop sharing. Now let's also take a look at a slightly more advanced setup. So far, I've tried to keep the required tools to a minimum, and we've been constrained to a single screen. And as you'll see, you can do a lot more easily if you have a two-screen setup. Now let's look at a setup that, one, gives you better control over your presentation and moderation of the event, and number two, gives you the ability to have online classes with breakout sessions. The first key to making this happen is to have a two-screen setup, which is what I have here. I have my laptop screen as my moderation and meeting tool screen, and I have an external monitor plugged into my laptop, which is the screen on which I run my presentation. And these could also be switched around. That basically depends on your preference. Now, also a note, I mounted the external webcam on top of this monitor because it generally looks nicer. I'd rather have it slightly above my eye line, looking slightly down at me, than below my eye line, looking up at me. In general, that just looks a bit nicer. And also, if I'm going to be looking at the presentation right here, I'm looking quite close towards that webcam. So that makes, that kind of feels more normal, where the presenter is looking your way. Now, why two screens? The main advantage of this is that I can have one screen, in this case my smaller lower screen, dedicated to kind of organization. So here is where I have, in one window, I have my Samba Live session, and I can see the participants, I can go into chat, I can do all the things like open my questions and answers panel, I can launch polls, and I can add a whiteboard here. And basically everything I need to do to manage the meeting itself is happening down here and is always in view. And I can also have another window here with my notes, and I could split this into however many sections I need to manage my chat, my participants, my meetings, my notes, everything. And it all keeps the other screen with the presentation completely free. And that means that I can share this whole screen, which gives me a second advantage. So if I go in here, I go share screen. Now I choose to share the entire screen. So that'd be screen number one. And I'm going to allow this. So it prompts me in a browser because this is a browser application. So now it's sharing this entire screen. So first of all, this gives me an advantage of I don't have to switch between tools as much, right? And I just have everything in front of me in one single overview, which makes it just much easier to work with. But it also gives me the advantage that I don't have to think about switching from screen sharing one app to another app. So if I want to switch between my slides and my whiteboard, I can just do that because anything that appears on this screen will show. So even if I just drag my notes up here, if I want to show my students my notes, all I do is drag it in here and I know that they'll see it. That's much easier than thinking, oh wait, I have to stop sharing this window and start sharing another window. Just makes it much easier. So this is basically a setup that removes friction, right? It makes it easier for you to present because you have everything in one place and you don't have to think as much about the technical details of what you're doing. It's easier to present. So it's definitely worth it. If you're going to be doing this a lot, if you're going to be doing a lot of online classes, it is absolutely worth getting a second screen to do that. It doesn't have to be, this is a fairly massive screen here. It doesn't have to be a huge and expensive screen at all. Basically, any external monitor will do. So even a pretty low priced external monitor you can place above or beside your laptop is going to make a world of difference to how easy and smooth it is to present online. The second thing I wanted to bring up, because we got a lot of questions and comments about this, of can I do online classes where we have like the main class presentation and then breakout rooms where people work together in smaller groups and then back to the main presentation. Now, when I was first asked this, I thought I have no idea if this is possible, but it turns out there are some meeting tools that have such features built in. The ones that I found that have such a feature built in are Samba Live, WebEx, Live Webinar, and Zoom. Now for this tutorial here, I'm not going to go into any great detail on how exactly to use this specific tool, but this is just one of the ones that is a browser tool that's quite handy because you don't have to install any desktop software to use this and anyone can join from a browser. And it has basically all the features you need to do a good online class, including polling features and Q&A and many others. And you can do screen sharing and all that, and you can do breakout sessions. And we'll link to the resource that shows you how exactly to do that below. All right, so those are the tools and the know-how that you need to make your next online class that much better. Stay tuned for upcoming lessons. We'll keep presenting different types of online events and classes and give you the tools and the know-how that you need to make the best of them. If you've enjoyed this course so far, we'd appreciate it if you leave a like on this video. Helps it reach more people. And of course, if you have any questions or other suggestions, please leave a comment below.